Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the 5 Phrases Series, Phrase 5, I Need This by the End of the Day webinar. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded today, Wednesday, June 18, 2014. Our presenters today are Richard Whitehead, Senior GTM Director, Marketing Solutions Group, AtTask, and Joe Talvansari, VP Marketing, IO Integration. Throughout his career, Richard has worked with many in-house creative teams to help them learn to effectively manage their workload and control work chaos. With over 20 years of experience in the software industry, Richard has worked in a variety of roles, including marketing, product management, and engineering. Joe is an entrepreneurial marketing executive with over 20 years of experience in integrated technology marketing and product management for startups and industry leaders alike, including IO Integration, Adobe, Microsoft, Akina Solar, Moxie, and Equifax. She holds a BS in Econometrics and Cognitive Science from UCSD and an MBA in Marketing from Seattle University. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Richard Whitehead. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate everybody joining us today. We're excited to be talking to you about dispelling the illusions of productivity, the things people say within marketing teams and creative teams that truly do spell productivity doom. As was mentioned, my name is Richard Whitehead. I'm the Senior Go-to-Market Director here at AtTask over our Marketing Solutions Group. I'm excited to have joining me Jill Talvansari. Welcome, Jill.
Oh, thank you for having me here today, Richard. I'm glad to be here. I'm with a proud AtTask reseller, IO Integration, and I'm VP of Marketing here.
Well, we're excited to have you join us today and talk about this phrase that we hear constantly, and I'm sure you have it as well. And that phrase that we hear on a regular basis, we know that the conditions within creative teams, they're not always what they seem. They look like this guy here at the center of this graphic. If you do want to follow us on Twitter, you can do that on hashtag 5Phrases. So you can follow us live on this webinar today. But as we know, there's a long list of cliches that are often used in the marketing and creative services and graphic design environments. And among those is a group of phrases we've deemed harmless because we hear them so often. Phrases that, like an optical illusion, seem like one thing, but they're really, when you look close, they're something else. This webinar series that we've been doing will help dispel the illusion of productivity and help creative teams and design teams and marketing teams across the globe to solve these productivity problems. The phrase that we're going to talk about today is probably one of my favorite. It happens to me on a regular basis. I need this by the end of the day, and I'm sure, Jill, you've heard this many times within your career, if not even today.
Yeah, we do hear this all the time. I mean, it's just a constant juggle, isn't it, with all this information streaming in all the time and the pressures to keep up to date on every front. Did you read TechCrunch? Do you know what Amazon's launching today? Did you get me the Lightroom? All the good things that take up our days.
Yeah, and in fact, you're lucky if it's actually that you have a day to do that. Sometimes it's like, I need this right now.
I know. A full day sounds... Yeah, I know. A full day sounds like a long time. Often it's, I need this in a few hours or by lunchtime.
Exactly. So what we see, of course, is, and this is no different anywhere that you go, whether it's a creative team or outside of a creative team, but procrastination seems to be prolific throughout organizations. We're a nation of procrastinators, or a Procrastination Nation. You know, we're juggling so many responsibilities among our professional, family, personal roles, and you know, if we know we need to get something done, unless it's absolutely necessary, you know, we put it off. That can be done tomorrow, and we kind of get distracted, if you will. And you know, I think, Jill, that this is a common thing that I see within our clients and probably with you as well.
It's really amazing how easy it is. It seems like all of us are starting to have attention deficit disorder, really with the constant interruption of the flow of what we're working on. To stay really focused requires a lot of perseverance and really understanding how to multitask and prioritize.
Well, one of my favorite cartoons is Calvin and Hobbes. My kids love it. I love it. I think it does show a lot of the real world scenarios. And we probably know coworkers just like this. We've worked with these type of people, the ones that can't seem to get their act together unless they're under some tremendous or serious deadline, or the pressure of those deadlines, particularly in the roles of creative teams or marketing teams. People whose job it is to be creative and brainstorm and come up with brilliant ideas. Unless there are parameters around that creativity, such as a hard deadline, we don't know where to stop brainstorming and really start to become creative. Unfortunately, that also means we get used to working frantically to meet those deadlines because suddenly we look up and, oh no, it's the end of the day, or that project is due today. It doesn't help when the situation is compounded by drive-by work requests, the coworker that we think is coming by to say hello, and in reality they're coming by to pile on more work. And then it's probably at 4 p.m. When we think we're going to be able to get home to do something with our families or something in our personal lives. This is one of my favorite things that I've seen on Facebook or other places where your lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. Frequently we see this happen within organizations. The person that's making the request hasn't planned for it, and so their emergency or their urgent need certainly becomes our problem when we had other things that we needed to get done that day. What we also know is that creative people, we don't want to be the office jerk. We don't want to be the one that says no, because frankly it's also important for us to get the cool work. We want to be able to say yes to things because it could be something like an ad campaign or creating a new logo for sales kickoff or something like that. So we end up being yes men and saying yes to everything. I don't know if that's happened in your environments, Jill, but it certainly happens here and with our clients.
No, we see it all the time, especially with creative teams. You were talking before about knowing when to stop brainstorming and start getting it done. And it really all comes down to setting expectations, doesn't it? If you're in a reactionary mode all of the time, it's really hard to do a good job. But if you plan ahead and you do have the time to do things well, then there's also this flip side where the characteristic is to be a perfectionist and do it perfectly. And there's a happy medium there. Where in the brainstorming, I had a great boss once that used to say that you have to know when to hit yourself over the head with a 2x4 during the creative process because it's just time to be done, because good enough is probably better than most people would have done the job anyway. And then when you think about brainstorming sessions, there was a recent time where we were brainstorming this infographic we wanted to come up with, and I ended up with a $1,000 graphic instead of a $500 graphic because we hadn't set parameters and expectations around how much time to put into that. So it's a real issue that most people face every day.
Well, and that's a great point, because often we don't know those parameters, and so we end up over creating, doing more than we thought we needed to, or like you said, doing less, and that certainly doesn't create a quality environment, nor does it create good things for the budget. Well, by the time we finish wrapping up that last-minute request, we're so far behind on the work because we've been interrupted. The actual really important work isn't getting done. We have to stay late at the office. We drink copious amounts of caffeine, 5-hour energy, whatever we have around us to just kind of keep things moving. Saw another great graphic the other day that talked about, I have caffeine so I can change the things I can, and I have alcohol so I can change the things I can't. And so what this kind of is the day-to-day grind that we end up in these creative environments, because, and certainly like this cat here that doesn't look very happy, taking care of business, working overtime, and chaos become a regular part of the day-to-day.
Yeah, you see this especially if you get a last-minute request at the end of the day when you've got all your files and everything ready to go on a project all tied up in a neat bow and ready to ship. And then maybe somebody during your approval process that had forgotten to get back to you suddenly realizes their deadline is looming within the hour, and they have lots of great feedback where things have changed slightly and they didn't let you know that to the last minute. And then suddenly now you're missing dinner.
Yeah. There was a client I was recently with where one particular client had, I think, in the neighborhood of 300 changes to a simple email. How that's possible, I don't even think there were 300 words in this whole email, but that change, that rework can put us in that cycle over and over, even though the person said, I want it by the end of the day. An end-of-the-day project can become a week-long project.
Yeah, I've always thought of that as being, I think that's way more common than we'd like to think or admit. And if it becomes really prevalent, I think of that as a symptom of chronic reactionary syndrome, that basically you've fallen into this pit of just you're always looking at the new shiny object and what's in front of you, and you're on a treadmill that does not stop. If it happens weekly, it's a problem that's going to eat into morale, cause stress, and impact other deadlines. But if it happens all the time, it's almost like a creativity rating scenario is another CRS acronym. It creates a fire drill atmosphere where everything ends up last minute and not in alignment with the goals so much as just trying to get it done and out the door. And at that point, you really should consider something like a marketing resource management solution or program managers, time management, anything you can do to automate the processes and get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, and it's like I was saying with that client that had 300 different changes to that single email. Sometimes even a single change or not having the right version of something, creates that same chaos. What we've seen, of course, and it's no surprise, there are a lot of surveys and things that have been looked at about how this affects morale, how it affects productivity, the state of the worker in today's environment. And in this particular survey from ComPsych, we see that this is borne out. In 2012, the survey said that 63% of workers have high levels of stress and extreme fatigue and feel out of control. I would say in a creative team, that's probably more like 98% feel this way because of that chaos in getting those drive-by requests, having that amount of rework, and all of those type of things. In that same survey, it showed that 36% of workers lose 1 hour or more per day, based on productivity solely because of that stress. And why is that, Jill? Is that something that you see as common?
Yeah, I'm seeing especially in some of the bigger companies, they do have a lot of processes in place, but it seems like a lot of the decisions are getting made at the VP, senior director, director levels. And then what happens is they do delegate the tasks of getting those things done down to the line managers, but the line managers have never bought into this vision or what the strategy is behind this set of tasks. Whereas if you bring everybody into the original decision and create consensus and drive it both from the top down and bottom up, usually you have a very well-honed machine that gets things done and everyone's feeling productive and like they're on the same train. Otherwise you end up with chaos.
Yeah, and it's interesting in other surveys I've seen where people want to make a difference and they want to matter to the organization. And so having that visibility that you were talking about in the bottoms up and top down, everybody on the same page, I can now see the direct result of the work that I'm doing. And I don't feel like a fly-by request or the work that I'm currently doing that it doesn't matter because everybody's aligned, then my work matters. So how do you align those priorities and get back to being happy and healthy, not drinking those copious amounts of caffeine unless you want to, and then of course going home at night and crying? It's important, of course, to align your priorities to those strategic business goals.
Yeah, so to avoid going home and crying into your beer glass as it is, to get over the caffeine up, really what we've been finding is that when marketing and creative work has proven processes and structures in place, it's like a well-honed machine. It's like watching a sheep-herding dog do its job, perfectly executing every whistle, sound, command issued from their owner, and working towards a common goal, which is penning the sheep. But what happens when you don't have proven processes and structures in place to handle things like last-minute work requests or a VP emergency? Instead, it's like squirrel. You end up with everybody running towards the next shiny object, and the last-minute work requests become squirrels. And then you're off to the races, and priorities and workflow go right out the door, and you're way off track, and everybody's not in alignment anymore. I will say, all of that said, if what the VP is asking for is a justified last-minute request, it's simply called your ability to keep your job is why you would do that. You wouldn't say no.
Yeah.
What have you seen, Richard?
No, it's important. I agree with you 100%. I think we've all seen this within organizations, with the clients we work with, or even in our own organization, where the work that we're doing, we quickly become distracted. That distraction can come from these drive-by requests. The distraction can come from coworkers, and it's a lot of things. We know that multitasking really doesn't work, right? Computers can multitask. Human beings cannot. We have to focus on a task at a time. And I do see some of the things that especially creative teams that are well-oiled, they also can work in blocks. And so instead of getting distracted quickly, take a couple hours and work on this project, and then take another couple hours and work on another one. And that way the creative juices can kind of stick around, and you don't get mired down with that one single thing.
Yeah, I mean, if they're going to end up off track, they really are getting set up for failure, and they do lose productivity. But I absolutely agree. Human beings do like to focus on one thing and then the next. So multitasking really is working in cohesive blocks throughout your day. In fact, you can actually map those priorities. If you think about it, if you're clear on what the organization's KPIs and strategy are, you know what's strategic and what's not. And then, of course, there's the what you want to do versus what you need to do. And if you want to make sure that your team's priorities are aligned with your company's strategies and goals, that's going to keep everyone in cohesion and moving forward. Of course, that assumes your company even has strategic goals, but let's assume for the sake of this webinar that you do, because if you don't, that's a whole other webinar for another day. But all of the tasks on your plate right now can be organized along those two axes. You either have what you want to do, what you need to do, versus the things that align with your company's strategic goals and those that don't. And basically what you want to be doing is focused on A. And here they are in priority order, in fact, from A to D. And you can think of this as a Z. So if it's not in A, you really do need to be questioning the trade-offs. If a VP asked me to get something done by the end of the day, unless I was moving earth and that was also due at the end of the day, I'd get it done. So obviously that's an A. But if it's happening all the time where somebody's coming by and doing the drive-by and asking you, can you just send me that file, or I've lost the latest version of this, do you happen to have it? Little requests like that can actually be handled with automation and processes and allow people to truly focus on their creative tasks in front of them. So that's the Z we were talking about, so moving from A, B to C to D. In fact, really it's learning how to tell someone no, isn't it?
Yeah, it really does come down to that, and even telling yourself no. I find that quite often, just because things in D might look enticing, it's sort of like with my kids sometimes, the D, maybe that's dessert, and that's something that they want to go for first. Sometimes the things in A are a little bit harder, right? There are things that take a little more time, or that we don't want to particularly work on them. So we know, and just like I said with my kids, I tell them, eat that first, eat the thing that you don't want to, the stuff that's good for you, and then you can get to the dessert if you have time.
Right, and oftentimes the B, C, D tasks are the ones that you can get done quickly and feel good about, but they're really just not as important. And the truth is, with the way people's days are filled today, you could have a 50 item long list of just A items is the truth of it. So really it's all about setting expectations, learning to say no, but not actually saying no. The way we used to do this at Microsoft actually was used basically an agile type of development method. And every Friday we would have basically a group meeting, and we would turn in what we had finished that week, what we had planned for the next week, what the blockers were, what we were going to do about it, and any red flags we would go through quickly. And if people weren't on the same page or weren't focused on the right things, then we would have that conversation as well. But what's wonderful about that is from week to week, month to month, it allows you to have conversations in your one-on-ones with your managers and peers that, well, that's great that you want to add this large project to our plate, but now we've already got these other 5 things. Where does that fall in this priority order? So you are having a conversation about what's not going to get done, but you're not saying no. You're saying we're highly productive, we're very focused, we're really all working together as a team, we're excited about what we want to do, but what's not going to get done.
And I really like that approach because that allows for everyone to have visibility into what everyone's working on. It sets the expectations for the day or the week, whatever it may be. And that way everybody, again, feels like they're doing something that matters.
Right, and it does continue to reiterate how we're all on the same page and that we believe in what we're doing. Because people do get distracted very, very easily, and because we all think about things in a slightly different way, it's important to continually either agree we're on the same page or understand why we're not and why we are changing focus or direction and what that means. How does that impact our timeline, resources, money, schedule? What if your workload's more than you can possibly even do in a 24-hour day?
Yeah, that's where I go and I try to get a 27-hour day. But that we know doesn't ever work.
No, you can always add 10% more, but it's going to eat away at somewhere, isn't it? And really, if you think about it, it's a zero-sum game. No matter how much work you have, you're not going to fit it physically into more than the 24 hours. So assuming an 8-hour work day, if you add more work to the pile, then something's bound to fall out. So the question is, what's going to fall out? And that's where you need to get really, really good at explaining the trade-offs to last-minute work requests. The good news is that if you have real, actual data to rely on, you don't have to say no with a question mark at the end of your tone. Richard, actually, I love what you guys are doing there at AtTask. What do you think?
Yeah, it's one of those key things, and I mentioned earlier that nobody likes to be no. The movie Yes Man, of course, is a classic that me and my family like to watch from, it sounds good, it feels good to say yes, but as you said, it's not a zero-sum game. So it's important to be able to understand what you're saying no to, what those trade-offs are, as you mentioned. One of our clients, Electrolux, has had the same challenge in the past, but they've been able to show the trade-offs, show what's happening within the organization. This is a small appliances North American division that's used to outsource all of their creative and design. But believe it or not, until they brought that in-house 4 years ago, they now have a small team creating marketing graphics and designs such as the ones that you see here on this slide. I'm sure that you recognize many of the products, Frigidaire, Eureka. These are great products on the market, and they're able to, with a relatively small team, produce some great content. And this is all done in-house now by 3 full-time designers. And like with any new team at a company, they had their share of growing pains as they figured out best practices on how to manage all their work, and they were getting from everyone in the small appliance division. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Sometimes they'd get back up from their desk and go to get a drink of water or something, and when they got back, they would see this. They would see a sticky note on their screen saying, we need a magazine, or we need a magazine ad ASAP. No signature. Who did this come from? What does this mean? Clearly a drive-by request. Those of you listening out there might be laughing right now because this is true everywhere. sticky notes, people coming by my desk, telling me things that need to be done by the end of the day. Now, obviously, there are several problems at play here. The poor designers have no clue who the requester is. They don't have enough detail to get started working on the request. Not just any details, but key things like which magazine, what's the audience, what product, much less which brand. And as you can see from the ads behind the Post-it note, this team is working on a lot of different things and a lot of different products. So now what the Electrolux team is able to do is they have actual data. They're able to build reports on a lot of scenarios, such as how many last-minute requests the team is fielding. This is kind of what's shown here. I know that it's a little bit small to see. But the fine print on what each pie represents, it can't be read because the size of the screenshot. But this is a real screenshot from the desk of the head of the Electrolux designer. The note that the report name states is request with due date exceptions, which is basically another way of stating last-minute work requests. Each segment of this pie chart represents the name of a requester who has requested last-minute work. So I think, Jill, you can see how crazy this designer must be going through all of these different requests with a small team.
That would be insane. You can't possibly manage expectations of, you've got, what is that? It must be at least 12 different pieces of the pie that you're basically answering to those different people, and then you've got your team of 3 trying to juggle all of those requests. It's not even fair.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is like what they could capture, not all the sticky notes that may be stuck to their desk.
Probably accidentally shredded them.
Yeah, exactly. Put them in the trash, or they got stuck to the bottom of my shoe on the way out the door. That tends to be the way most of my sticky notes end up. So the story actually goes hand in hand with our third tip or strategy today, and that's to make your priorities visible. Not just to you and your team, but to the whole organization. What is it that you're working on? Quite frequently I get the creative teams that we're working with that say, oh, you're just the logo and T-shirt people, so you can't possibly be busy. I don't know, Jill, in your experience working with creative teams, do they feel valuable? What are some of their challenges there?
Actually I've seen some really successful internal PR campaigns done this way, where once you realize that the value that your team brings to the organization isn't appreciated or understood as aptly as it should be. In fact, we had this, we did this at Adobe at one point. We had a small product we were working on for creatives, and we needed to interface with every single other team, all the other products. And we basically were starting to hold these brown bag lunch and learns for internal employees of Adobe to learn more about what we were doing, to embrace the new technology that we were bringing into the company and across the product teams. We also had posters. We had a contest. We had intranet sites. And then we had quarterly updates to executive staff so that it provided the visibility and higher profile that we needed to get the support we would require to get this out the door over a couple-year period. It wasn't something we could deliver on immediately because it did take a lot of buy-in and consensus. To do that internal type of PR for your team, you have to make your priorities visible and the difference that you're making visible to everybody.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example as well of what our creative team here at AtTask is doing. So Dave LeSueur has been going around and talking to other creative teams about his approach to work, and more specifically creative work. What we find extremely exciting is that he's able to apply the Agile process to the creative work that his team does. So much like you were talking about, Jill, of what is it I'm working on, who's working on what, you can see here that starting at the beginning of the week, they literally have a stand-up meeting, just like a Scrum team in a development organization. They look at the work that's before them, and then they do sprints. And a sprint is a period of time by which they can complete that work. So in this case, they're starting out their beginning of their week. They can see what work they have to do. The different colors represent the different people that are working on the things. and then they assign them throughout the week, and then as it goes through the week it burns down until all the work that's assigned to them or that they've put onto their plate actually happens. Now what I particularly love about this, being one of the consumers of the great creative work this team does, is that at any time, sitting outside of our offices, they put this up on a big screen. We can walk by and see it, we can log in and see it, and we can see exactly the point at which that creative piece is at. Is it still in production? Is it being printed? What bottlenecks might be there? If the burn down isn't going correctly as to the way they want it, that green bar that you see across the top on the previous slide would be red or yellow, just again depending on what the burn down is for the week. And so this team, again, just like Electrolux, fairly small team, is able to produce quite a bit of creative work, not just amount of work, but the quality of the work. The things that you're seeing in this presentation, the illustrations that we do, the infographics and other things like that are able to be produced by this team using this very unique method to get things done. What this also does, we talked about stand-up meetings. They have one meeting at the beginning of the week, and then if necessary, they get together and literally stand in front of this monitor, so I guess there's another stand-up meeting to discuss any needs with the team. So meetings are another thing that can be cut down when you have visibility into the work that's being done. Is that similar to what you see, Jill?
Yeah, I think it's critical to only have meetings when you need them. Otherwise you end up with literally every hour of every day filled with meetings where you're supposed to be meeting about something you're going to get done, but then actual work takes place before 8 a.m. and after 5 or 6 p.m.
Yeah, and it's a constant challenge. In this webinar series that we've been doing, we've talked about that and how meetings can make that so it's less productive for organizations. Having a single source of truth where everyone can have visibility, in this case, even the VP walking past the monitor, he or she can take a look at their project or other projects that are being worked on. What I love about this, again, is the value that the creative team has to the organization is monumentally increased. And that's one of the big things that we hear from creative teams, or that I hear, that they don't feel that they're valued. And of course what ends up happening then is morale decreases, people decide to leave, they go into doing freelance work, which we know the chaos that involves there. And so it's important to have everybody see what you're doing and the great work that's being done within that creative or marketing team. So what we've talked about and shown you today, hopefully, is that you can change that illusion of productivity and make it a reality. It doesn't take tricks. Really, it's just about taking the magic of AtTask. With AtTask, as we talked about with Electrolux, you can manage all requests in a single location. You can prioritize those strategically so that you can take your creative work and do that ABCD type of process that Jill talked about earlier. You can collaborate in the context of your marketing work. One of the things I see regularly is, as Jill talked about and what IO Integrations helps with, is that where's that file? I search through my email box to try to find things. Is that the right version? Is that the final version? But being able to collaborate in context and have documents and updates and all of those things in the same place really cuts down on the collaboration and those meetings that we talked about. And as a result, of course, you'll have more time to be creative, meet those deadlines, and have higher customer satisfaction.
Having a visual picture of this out in front of everybody the way that you do there really forces the issue. It's something we see a lot in the work that we do here at IO Integration, is that creative teams have all of their assets and everything they're working on literally on their desktop. They don't even have it on shared servers or outside of their own little silo of their piece of the organization. They might be in the online team, but whereas the print and studio people are on other servers. Whereas if you can get all of this working together in shared processes and automate it, then you get that real collaboration and everybody knows where the latest version of the file is. But by starting by seeing everything up visually on this one screen of what's being worked on, it forces people to collaborate and embrace those types of processes.
And what I love about that is that it does it in a natural way. So it's not something that
Exactly.
people are going to have to, like, again, do some magic trick to get it to happen, because it's easy to use. It can be quickly adopted within the organization, and no longer hunting through emails or Post-it notes stuck to the bottom of my shoe and work not getting done, and again, that chaos that we talked about earlier. One of the happy clients that we've worked with, and even their tagline talks about happiness delivered, is Harry and David. You can see here from the quote that AtTask really helps to focus the communication between our departments, gives us a centralized location to track, review, and archive the information being exchanged. It prevents a lot of the stray communication and the fragmentation that can happen with email and voicemail. We get stuff done faster, more accurately, and without a lot of unnecessary back and forth. I think that really summarizes it well as far as what you're able to do with a single source of truth. Everything is in context. Everyone has visibility. So those drive-bys that we talked about, I need this by the end of the day, they don't happen nearly as much as they used to because of that visibility that everybody has in the organization. That is just one example of the many clients that we work with. There are many others that are equally as happy, all the way from agencies like RAP to ESPN, Electrolux we talked about on this webinar today. But many customers rely on AtTask every day to ensure that visibility happens across the organization. If you'd like more information to get a custom demo about the AtTask solution and marketing work management, you can visit us at marketing.attask.com. We also have our other 4 phrases that were in this series. Phrase 1, let me email that to you again, so it's the top of the list. Something I think, Jill, that you hear on a regular basis. It's 80% done.
Is that final? That's my favorite.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's one of the perfect ones there for I/O integrations. Happens more times than we could possibly say. As I talked about the 300 revisions of one client that they had, or just trying to keep my head above water. You can follow us at AtTask or at AtTask_MKTG. We have additional information about upcoming webinars that are coming in the coming months, July 10th as well as July 18th. What we'd like to do now is open it up for some questions. It looks like we have a few that are coming in now, and we'll answer your questions. If you do have other things, you can obviously follow me at Richard Ernie. Long story as to why that's my handle, but we'll talk about that on another webinar another day. So it looks like we've got a couple of questions coming in here. It says, when a project is declined, do you offer suggestions on how they can help themselves? Jill, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, I wouldn't do that, or you might find yourself out of work. If they can figure out how to live without you, that's not really a good solution. I mean, ultimately, I've always learned that you want to do the very best job you can of essentially working yourself out of a job. Do such a great job that you have finished that project or task and you're ready for the next thing because you've proven yourself. So the last thing you want to do is turn it down and teach them how to do it themselves. That said, if you could automate some of it and get them to do minimal parts by themselves that make sense for their team to own, absolutely. There's lots of technology available to help you do that. Yeah,
and I would echo that. And depending on what that particular job is, there could be things that, for example, I know our creative team gets asked a lot for the logos. And so that might be kind of one of those last-minute request things. Having a central library, having a place where people can go to get the latest collateral, the latest content, is another great strategy to, I guess, how they can help themselves. But as Jill said, you certainly don't want them to be off creating some graphic or things like that.
Right. I mean, from a marketing perspective, I don't want them doing their own event management. But on the other hand, if they're a brand owner, I do want them to be able to get the latest piece of content or collateral. So having a brand portal or a system that we're using for combined approvals makes a ton of sense.
Perfect. All right, the next question coming in here says, our team is very task-oriented, constantly moving and piling on tasks like we are a factory. As a one-man band, when it comes to marketing, the problem with this is that it doesn't give me time to strategize, and oftentimes things get done with half effort and just to, quote-unquote, get it done, without pre-planning, strategizing, and even worse, without review or follow-up. How do I explain the need for including this time for strategizing to our team when, quote, just getting it done is their only goal? This is classic, what I hear, of course, with clients as well. There's not time put into the system for strategizing and producing that quality work. So I'll take a crack at this one, Jill, and then you can chime in. But basically, what we've done here at AtTask, and we've also done with other clients, is because we have history of projects, one way to do this is looking at the history of how long it takes for a particular task. And so we've created templates. We know, for example, that producing a webinar like this one takes a certain amount of time. We know for success stories, it takes a certain amount of time. So just in fact, the other day, our creative team told me, in fact, that I can't have a success story done within 2 weeks because they know it takes 4 weeks to do that based on historical data and based on the amount of work that they currently have on the team. So the two things I would say is show them the history and also show them what you're working on. And I think between those two things it will help them see that there's an important part of strategizing to get quality work.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is the whole concept of just getting it done without looking at where that falls into your strategy. You're going to fall into that rut of not really knowing what you're doing and not having the requirements up front. So I'm going to bet that along with all of that, there's a lot of redo, a lot of rework, and tons of lost productivity. So if you put the time in up front to define exactly what your goal is, you're going to get it done the first time the right way, fast.
Yeah, exactly. So another great point, Jill, is making sure that they see or show where it fits within the strategy of the organization. All right, the next question is for large corporations that have enterprise architecture structures and approval processes, does AtTask have experience in successful implementations? And the answer is absolutely yes. We've worked with some of the largest organizations in the world. One of them I had on a webinar with me recently was Cisco. And Cisco, of course, as you can imagine, has an incredibly large enterprise architecture and has to tie in with a lot of different things. If you go back in and if you do have time to listen to that webinar, you'll hear Dan Taylor talk about his support of the executive team and the customer response center there at Cisco and how they're able to show approvals, but not just approval process, but the other interesting thing when you have visibility is you can actually show people who's consuming the most budget, the most time. Look at Electrolux. Electrolux was showing where those requests are coming from, who's taking the most time away from the creative team, and they're able to use that information to successfully show either we need more budget or we need people to leverage the creative team better. Anything
absolutely
there,
large.
Jill, as far as
yeah, I was thinking the largest companies with the most matrixed, distributed organizations are the ones that can benefit from these types of tools the most. It keeps everyone on the same page and really keeps everything flowing.
Yeah, and it's another part of that too, is we know how difficult it can be to track certain people down, and being able to set up rules, because the following question was asked, working within rules about storing and sharing information. We certainly work with a lot of clients that do have that challenge. I have to follow this process, and the more you can define that process up front is important. AtTask has world-class services organization that works with these types of clients, again, around the globe, to ensure that the right process is put in place, that those rules are adhered to, and whether it's Cisco that I mentioned, we work with banks, we work with a lot of those type of organizations.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is to clearly identify what the process is, see if there are any fundamental changes you can make to optimize it, and then basically you're automating that. You're using these technologies like AtTask, digital asset management, other technologies to enable that process to become just part of their work and the flow that goes between all of the different desktops.
Perfect. This next question is about, we're a current customer of AtTask, but I've never seen that storyboard feature. I'm assuming you're talking about the Agile storyboard that we showed. That is actually part of the Agile methodology, and when you create a team, you basically make that team an Agile team. We're going to be doing a webinar on that on July 10th that will show you more details about how to set that up. But it's the way you create a team, setting it up as an Agile team that basically shows that quote-unquote storyboard. All right, let's go to some other questions. Time for a couple more. This one comes in. It says, our team is split remotely. Half of us are in corporate home office, but the other half is spread out across the country. What with even some members overseas? How do we collaborate without resorting to email? Well, the first thing I would say is, email is pervasive, and email is going to be something that you're going to use regardless. The point of using a solution like AtTask is to minimize the amount of email and the type of email that comes across, and not to use email as a workflow or collaboration tool for getting some of that work done. So having a central source of truth, having a solution like AtTask that's easy to use and that's going to be adopted will certainly help reduce the amount of email. Won't eliminate, because that's, like I said, is certainly something that is still going to be pervasive in the organization. But it makes it easier to collaborate and organize information. Jill talked about finding files. So I don't know, Jill, if you want to talk more about the chaos of using email to find files.
The last thing you want to do is, for example, if I have something in my inbox from Laura, there might be 3 versions of that file from Laura, but if we had instead been collaborating on either a cloud-based solution or servers in our IT infrastructure, whether it's on-site or hosted, it doesn't matter. It can be even across the cloud and on-premise. If we were collaborating on a file that had its own version control built into it, nobody would ever wonder where the latest version was or who had done things on it, because that information is all there in one place and it's got a single source of truth.
Perfect. All right, looks like we have time for one more question. So this one is, how do you get buy-in from people in your company on new processes or new solutions or things like that? Basically, it's 2 things. And also in a recent webinar we did with CMO of Mitel, it starts with having somebody that sponsors that, a champion within the organization. Somebody, in fact, either at the department level or better yet at that executive level, to make sure that everyone sees that this is part of our strategic goals that Jill, you mentioned before. Once you have that, then it's about making sure that you have a solution that can be easily adopted, that works the way you do, that works in the flow of creativity versus against creativity. So some traditional tools out there, frankly, I've seen time and time again, people look at free tools. They look at even sticky notes as a tool. It just becomes chaotic because it's not centralized, and frankly, all of these tools have their fatal flaws because it's not a single source of truth. So company or executive buy-in, and then of course having that single source of truth, I think that all comes together, and then making it work the way you do through that services engagement. Jill, anything you want to add?
There's a lot of different ways to calculate the return on investment on any of these types of information technology solutions and the investment you're going to make. And something that I learned, actually a guy I work with here at IO Integration, Rich wrote an article on this for DAM Solutions, but basically it's all about finding out what your CFO or whoever the primary business sponsor or stakeholder is personally interested in. So whatever makes their boat float. So if they're interested in saving time, money, people, competitive advantage, getting better digital rights management, keeping their legal department involved, whatever it is that they are most concerned about, their biggest pain point, that's the way you want to present your case for the return on investment for whatever system it is that you want to bring into your company.
Perfect. Well, we've had an exciting webinar. Hopefully everyone has found it informational and enjoyable. I appreciate Jill, you joining me today. We hope that everyone has a fantastic day. Again, come back again. We've got some exciting webinars coming up in the future. We've also got some that we've recorded in this series, and we hope that everybody has a fantastic day. Thank you very much.